Hello again, and welcome back to another SanteDB Quick Bits video tutorial. In this video, we're going to be doing the same thing that we did in our previous video, except rather we'll be installing SanteMPI on a Docker environment rather than on a Windows environment. I think you'll find if you've watched the previous video that the installation procedures themselves are pretty similar. The only difference with Docker over a Windows installation is that we don't have the configuration tool and we have to use the environment variables. So without further ado, let's get to it. So to start with, we can visit help.santesuite.org. And under the installation section, there is an article called the Quick Start Guide. The Quick Start Guide is actually somewhat the script for this Quick Bits video, in that we are going to be actually following all of these tutorial steps from the wiki in our video. I've gone ahead and I've installed Visual Studio Code, and I've also installed SoapUI. Just like in the Windows environment, SoapUI is the tool we're going to be using to actually validate and run the installation qualification on our particular MPI setup. So first I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to download the SoapUI project. So I'm just going to click on the link for the SoapUI project and I'm going to press download, and I'm going to press Control S to save this, and I'm just going to save it in my downloads. And in SoapUI, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to import that project into my SoapUI instance just to get the installation qualification tool ready to go. Next, since I don't want to hand code my docker-compose file, we actually have a Hello MPI project on our GitHub, which has the docker-compose file already created for you. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to clone this particular project. And I'm going to come over to my command prompt here, and I'm going to clone it into my local environment. Next, I'm going to go ahead and cd into that directory, and I'm just going to go ahead and launch Visual Studio Code on my docker-compose file so we can take a look at what a SanteMPI application looks like as a docker-compose file. So you can see here we have a series of services which are defined for our MPI. The first is the database service. And when we're deploying SanteMPI or SanteDB, we need to ensure that our environment has a database. And it's just easy to use the PostgreSQL Docker image if you're using Docker. And I've gone ahead and I've exposed the ports for PostgreSQL externally. You don't need to do this on a production instance, but for a development instance, it certainly helps to get access to your data if you're going to be debugging things. Next, we have the ICDR. And in this instance, we're using the MPI image. And this is the ICDR with the MPI plugins already copied over to the MPI. And we're going to set a series of environment variables which controls the features and the configuration of the SanteMPI image. The first is the SDB feature environment variable. And the SDB feature is a semicolon separated list of features that you want to have enabled on your MPI. So if, for example, you're in production and you don't want Swagger documentation exposed, you could remove Swagger. You could also swap out your RAM cache with a Redis cache feature, etc. Next, we have our configuration for HL7. How are we going to authenticate HL7 version 2 messages, and here we're just going to use MSH8 secrets. We're setting our matching mode to weighted matching. We are setting our master data management plugin to only use patients, because that's what an MPI does, is master data management on patients. And then we are setting our database connection strings to our PostgreSQL image that we've actually created previously. Then we're just setting the data policy action to hide data which we're not allowed to see. And finally, we are setting the server to delay start for 5 seconds. And this allows, on this particular development machine, the database server to start up before SanteMPI attempts a start. Once again, I'm exposing my ports. 8080 on SanteMPI is the API, and 2100 is the HL7 version 2 interface port. And finally, we have our web access gateway. And once again, this is just a Docker container running the vanilla DCDR web access gateway. And ports, we're exposing our port 9200 because, once again, that's what the DCDR gateway uses. And finally, we are setting up some volumes. And the volumes are good if you want to actually persist your MPI instance between a start-stop of Docker. And I'm just going to go ahead and correct this spacing issue here. So now that we have our Docker Compose file configured, we're going to go to our Docker console here, or to our Windows console, and we're actually going to do a Docker Compose up. And we're going to download our database and our latest SanteDB images. And when that's done, I'll join you for the startup. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to allow access on our firewall. And what you're going to notice here is that there is a lot of activity happening on the initial startup of SanteMPI. And what SanteMPI is doing on its initial start, if you've seen our Windows installation video, is it's doing the same procedure as the initial startup on the Windows machine, except it's doing it now on Linux with on Linux with a Docker container. And I can actually, at this point, because we've started up our www instance, I can actually visit my local host. And I'm going to have the exact same startup screen as our Windows installation. It's just, you'll notice here the device ID is a random portion of a UUID. And that just has to do with the way that Docker names the internal environment name of the machines that are running in Docker containers. So I'm just going to name my device something meaningful. And in the domain field on the Windows install, we were connecting to localhost. However, you have to remember that's from the context of the machine that's running the host. And in Docker, localhost is the web access gateway itself. So if you put in localhost here, it wouldn't work. You have to actually put in the name of the container that you've set as your ICDR host. And in this case, it is SanteDB MPI. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that and paste it in here. And then once again, if I've changed my secret for the application, or if I want to use TLS, if I've set that up on Docker, I can go ahead and use that. But I have not set up any of that. So I'm going to hit and join domain. And once again, the web access gateway is prompting me to log in. So I'm just going to log in with the default administrative username, which is, in our case, administrator, and the password of Mohawk123. And I'm just going to go ahead and log in. And we will see after a second here that we have a welcome to the domain message. I'm just going to press OK. Just like in the Windows installation, we're going to select automatically update applets, and we're going to select the master patient index function role. And we're going to hit next. We're going to, again, switch this to online only because this is a web access gateway container, not a disconnected gateway container, so it does not have the ability to run in disconnected mode. The log detail we're going to keep as errors and warnings. The application services, we do not need any of these for the web access gateway. If we were running the disconnected gateway on, for example, a Raspberry Pi, and we wanted to enable Bluetooth, peer-to-peer sharing of data, we could enable that here, but we're just running the web access gateway, so we're just going to hit next. Our optimization, we are just going to leave it as default, and we are not going to proxy access because we are, again, running on the same instance. And again, finally, with the other settings page, we can customize the settings that we would like our SanteMPI web access gateway to have. So on the quick start guide, if I have customization of the user interface, you'll see here that there's a link to what these settings are and what each of these settings do. So for example, we can forbid the collection of a name prefix or a name suffix. For example, in some jurisdictions, you might not have family names or prefixes or suffixes. You might just want to collect the given name, and that's where you would disable those particular settings. And as was mentioned in the Windows installation video, most customized deployments of SanteDB in a particular context will have a custom setup screen, a custom setup process, and they would preset those particular settings, but this is just the community version, so we have to specify that manually. I'm just going to press the finish button, and once again, the Docker instance is going to restart. And if I go back to my Docker Windows console here, I can see that there is a bunch of activity occurring on my Docker containers here from the web access gateway. And when I go back over to my page, my configuration page here, it's been refreshed, and we now have our login screen. Now I'm going to log into the MPI using the same username and password as I used before, administrator and Mohawk123. And you can see here, just like on the Windows tutorial, we're presented with our dashboard. And just going to explore the dashboard very quickly. Here we have our system panel, which has a series of things like diagnostic probes. We can take a look at our server status to see what version of software is running on our Docker containers. And this is helpful if you're diagnosing missing features or bugs. You could certainly look at the versions of data on your Docker containers. We also have our security panel, which provides us with a summary of security settings on the server, reference data, which shows us the identity domains which have been configured, and the SanteMPI dashboard. And you can see here we have an access denied. And the reason that we have access denied by default is that when we install SanteDB on any context, administrators do not have access to clinical data. So since this is just a demonstration environment, we're going to go ahead and we're going to give our administrators access to clinical data. So to do that, I'm going to click on the groups, and I'm going to click on administrators. And I'm going to go ahead, and the permissions that we want are unrestricted MDM and unrestricted clinical data. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that they are grants permissions on there. And if you just immediately click back on the SanteMPI tab, you'll see that you're still denied access. And the reason that that happens is that it's when a session is established that policies are assigned to the session. And this session was established prior to the administrators group having permission. So I'm just going to go ahead and log out. And log back in. And now we can see that we have more panels on our dashboard, and we also have the SanteMPI dashboard available to us without any restrictions. And we can change our match settings, or we can do searches on the patient population. But I don't have any patients in this database, so let's go ahead and add some patients by doing our installation qualification. So the installation qualification tooling here, you can see it is just a SanteMPI project which has a series of interfaces which have been restricted to what the MPI requires. And we also have a mock service, which I'm going to go ahead and start, minimized. And this is a receiving point that allows our MPI somewhere to send notifications to, so we can verify that notifications are working properly. And then to run the installation qualification tool, I just have to open up the installation qualification panel and press play. And I'm going to go ahead and let this run, and I'll be back with you when it's done. All right, so our installation qualification tests have run, and we can see that we have a green status, which means that every test has passed. And if you're interested in seeing what each of these particular tests do, you can just go ahead and open the test case, and you'll see each of the steps. And these steps actually mimic on the wiki. If I quickly go back to the wiki, in the installation section of the wiki, you'll see that there is a server section with installation qualification and master patient index qualification. And we can take a look in here at the FHIR test cases. And you'll notice that each of these test cases exactly match the name of the particular test case in SanteMPI. So it's a quick way to get documentation on what these tests are actually validating. If I go back to my dashboard here and I hit refresh, now what we're going to see here is a list of SanteMPI's patient registration, or the patient population, with all of the patients that were registered during our test. And I can click on view, and here we can see that there is, in fact, quite a bit of information in our MPI. And we've now validated that our MPI is available, that it is running, and has been set up correctly. And there you have it. We have set up and installed SanteMPI on an instance of Docker, and this installation mimics what we did on Windows. In our next video, we're going to be doing the exact same procedure, but we're going to be doing it on a fat Linux installation, or rather a virtual environment running a real version of Linux, running Ubuntu 20.04. And we're going to do the exact same procedure on Linux, and you'll find that it tends to be closer to the Windows setup procedures than the Docker setup procedures. But that is something that we'll explore next week. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.